The barn door creaked open in the dead of night, and Colt Brennan stepped inside with his lantern raised high, expecting to find the usual culprits, a coyote or perhaps a stray dog. But instead his light fell upon a young woman curled in the hay, her dress torn and muddy, her dark hair matted with dried blood. She woke with a gasp that tore through the silence, her green eyes wide with terror as she scrambled backward into the corner, pressing herself against the wooden planks as though she could disappear through them. Her hands came up defensively, and Colt saw the bruises on her wrists, the scratches along her arms, the way she trembled like a wounded animal. "Easy now," Colt said softly, setting the lantern down and raising both hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." She shook her head frantically, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please don't send me back." Colt's jaw tightened at the fear in her voice, at the desperation that radiated from her like heat from a fire. He had seen enough in his 30 years to recognize someone running from something terrible, and every instinct he possessed told him this woman needed help. "Stay," he said firmly, his voice gentle but commanding. "You're safe here now." The woman stared at him, her chest heaving, clearly trying to decide whether to believe him or bolt. Colt remained perfectly still, letting her look her fill, letting her see that he was alone, that he had no weapon drawn, that his weathered face held only concern. "My name is Colt Brennan," he continued quietly. "This is my ranch, about 15 miles outside of Tucson, Arizona. It's October 1878, and I give you my word that no one is going to hurt you while you're under my roof." Something in his tone must have reached her, because the woman's rigid posture softened just slightly. She was young, Colt realized, probably around 23 or 24, with delicate features that would have been pretty if not for the fear etched into every line of her face. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the barn door as though calculating her chances of escape. Finally, she whispered, "Rosalie Tucker." "Miss Tucker," Colt said respectfully, "you look like you could use some water, some food, and a proper place to rest. Will you let me help you?" Rosalie's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as though trying to hold back a sob. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Don't need to know you to see you're in trouble," Colt replied simply. "Come on up to the house. I've got a spare room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, lives in the cottage out back. She can help you get cleaned up." Rosalie looked at him for a long moment, and Colt could see the internal battle raging behind her eyes. Trust didn't come easy to someone who had been hurt, and he understood that. He waited patiently, giving her the time she needed to make her decision. Finally, she nodded just once and tried to stand. Her legs buckled immediately, and Colt moved forward instinctively to catch her. She flinched at his touch, but he kept his grip gentle and steady, supporting her weight without crowding her. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. "I don't remember," Rosalie admitted, her voice barely audible. 2 days, maybe 3. Colt muttered a curse under his breath and carefully helped her toward the barn door. She was light as a feather in his arms, all skin and bones beneath the tattered dress, and anger stirred in his chest at whoever had done this to her. The walk to the ranch house was slow, with Rosalie leaning heavily against him. The October night was cool, and Colt could feel her shivering despite the warmth radiating from his body. The house loomed ahead, a sturdy 2-story structure he had built with his own hands after returning from the war, and for the first time in years, Colt was grateful for its size and solitude. He helped Rosalie up the porch steps and through the front door, guiding her to the settee in the parlor. She sank onto it with a small sound of relief, and Colt quickly lit several lamps, flooding the room with warm light. "I'm going to get Mrs. Garcia," he said. "Don't move, I'll be right back." Rosalie nodded weakly, her eyes already starting to close. Colt grabbed a blanket from the back of a chair and draped it over her shoulders, before heading out the back door toward the small cottage where his housekeeper resided. Mrs. Garcia answered his knock almost immediately, her gray hair in a long braid down her back, her dark eyes sharp despite the late hour. Senor Brennan, what is wrong? I found a woman in the barn, Colt explained quickly. She's hurt, scared, and half-starved. Can you help her, Mrs.? Garcia's expression shifted from concern to determination in an instant. Of course, let me get my things. Within minutes, they were back in the main house, where Rosalie was exactly where Colt had left her, though she had pulled the blanket tight around herself. Mrs. Garcia took one look at the young woman and immediately switched into a mode Colt had seen many times before, efficient, gentle, and utterly unflappable. Come, Mija, Mrs. Garcia said softly, holding out her hand. Let us get you cleaned up and into some proper clothes. Senor Brennan, you will make food, yes? Colt nodded. Already on it. He watched as Mrs. Garcia helped Rosalie to her feet and guided her toward the stairs. Rosalie glanced back at him once, her expression unreadable, before disappearing up to the second floor. Colt moved into the kitchen and set about preparing a simple meal. He started a fire in the stove, put on a pot of coffee, and began heating up the beef stew Mrs. Garcia had made earlier that day. He sliced fresh bread, set out butter and honey, and filled a pitcher with cool water from the pump. His mind raced as he worked, turning over the pieces of the puzzle that was Rosalie Tucker. The way she had said, "Don't send me back," suggested she was running from someone specific. The bruises on her wrists looked like finger marks, as though someone had grabbed her roughly. And the blood in her hair, had she been struck, or had she fought back? Colt's hands clenched into fists and he forced himself to take a deep breath. Whatever had happened to Rosalie, she was safe now. He would make sure of it. About 30 minutes later, Mrs. Garcia reappeared in the kitchen doorway. Her expression was grim. She has been beaten, Senor Brennan, bruises everywhere, some old, some new, and she is very frightened. She would not tell me what happened, only that she ran away and has been traveling for days. Colt's jaw tightened. Did she say from where? No, but she has the look of someone who has been running from more than just distance. Mrs. Garcia paused, then added, She is wearing one of my dresses now, and I have started a bath for her. She may be down soon, or she may fall asleep. That girl is exhausted. Thank you, Mrs. Garcia, Colt said sincerely. I know it's late. The older woman waved a hand dismissively. This is important. I will stay in the guest room tonight in case she needs me. You will behave like a gentleman, yes? Colt gave her a look. Always do. Mrs. Garcia smiled faintly. I know, Mijo, I know. She returned upstairs and Colt finished preparing the food. He was just setting everything on the dining table when he heard soft footsteps on the stairs. He turned to see Rosalie descending slowly, one hand on the railing for support. She looked entirely different, cleaned up. Mrs. Garcia had lent her a simple blue dress that fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose on her thin frame. Her dark hair had been washed and braided, falling over one shoulder, and without the dirt and blood obscuring her face, Colt could see just how beautiful she was. But it was her eyes that caught him, large, expressive, and filled with a wariness that made his heart ache. Feeling better? He asked gently. Rosalie nodded, though she didn't quite meet his gaze. Thank you for everything. I don't know why you're being so kind, but I'm grateful. Sit, Colt said, gesturing to the table. Eat. We can talk after. Rosalie moved to the table and sat down carefully, as though her body hurt with every movement. Colt served her a bowl of stew, and the moment the food was in front of her, she began eating with the desperate hunger of someone who had been starving. She forced herself to slow down after a few bites, as though remembering her manners, but Colt just pushed the bread basket closer to her. Take your time, he said. There's plenty. They ate in silence, and Colt gave her space to simply exist without pressure. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was just be present without demanding anything in return. When Rosalie finally set down her spoon, she looked more alive than she had in the barn. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her hands had stopped trembling quite so badly. Thank you, she said again, her voice stronger now. I haven't eaten like that in a long time. Colt nodded and leaned back in his chair, his coffee cup cradled in his hands. You don't have to tell me anything if you're not ready, he said. But if you're running from someone, I need to know so I can keep you safe." Rosalie's expression shuddered, and for a moment, Colt thought she might refuse to answer. But then she took a shaky breath and said, "I was married to a man named Gerald Tucker. He owned a ranch about 40 miles north of here, closer to Phoenix." Colt's stomach sank. I left him," Rosalie said flatly. "3 nights ago, he was drunk, and when he passed out, I took a horse and ran. I've been traveling ever since, trying to put as much distance between us as possible." "He hurt you," Colt said. It wasn't a question. Rosalie's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Yes, for 2 years. It started small, a shove here, a harsh word there, but it got worse. Much worse. I thought about leaving before, but he always said he would find me, that no one would believe me, that I had nowhere to go. And now I don't care," Rosalie said, her voice hard. "I would rather die out here in the desert than spend another day with him." Colt felt a surge of protective anger so strong it nearly took his breath away. He had seen too much cruelty in his life, first during the war and then in the rough years that followed, but there was something particularly vile about a man who would hurt a woman who trusted him. "He's not going to find you here," Colt said firmly. "And even if he does, he'll have to go through me first." Rosalie looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time some of the fear in her eyes gave way to something else, hope maybe, or the fragile beginning of trust. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't know me, you don't owe me anything." Colt met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, because no one deserves what you've been through, and because I meant what I said in the barn, you're safe here now." Rosalie's lower lip trembled and a single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, as though ashamed of the display of emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," Colt said. "Just rest and heal, that's all I ask, Mrs." Garcia appeared in the doorway then, her expression gentle. "Come, Mija, let me show you to your room, you need sleep." Rosalie stood slowly, her exhaustion evident in every movement. She looked at Colt one more time, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something, but in the end, she simply nodded and followed Mrs. Garcia upstairs. Colt sat alone at the table for a long time after they left, staring into his coffee cup and thinking about the terrified woman who had stumbled into his life. He had been alone for so long, content with his horses and his land and the quiet rhythm of ranch life. But something had shifted tonight, something fundamental, and Colt had the unsettling feeling that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the Arizona sun already warm despite the early hour. Colt rose before dawn as he always did, moving through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. He fed the horses, checked the fences, and hauled water from the well, all while keeping one eye on the house, Mrs. Garcia was already in the kitchen when he came in for breakfast, and she gave him a knowing look. "She is still sleeping. I checked on her an hour ago. That girl is exhausted, Senor Brennan." "Let her sleep as long as she needs," Colt said. "I'll be working close to the house today in case she wakes and needs anything." Mrs. Garcia smiled. "You are a good man." Colt shrugged off the compliment and grabbed a biscuit from the basket on the counter. "Just doing what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Mrs. Garcia said quietly. "Not everyone." Colt worked through the morning, repairing a section of the corral fence and grooming the horses. He was mucking out stalls when he heard the back door of the house open. He looked up to see Rosalie standing on the porch, one hand shading her eyes against the sun. She looked better in the daylight, though the bruises on her face were more visible now, a sickly yellow-green that made Colt's blood boil. She had braided her hair again, and she wore the same blue dress from the night before. Colt set down his pitchfork and walked over to the porch. "Morning." "Sleep well?" Rosalie nodded. "Better than I have in months. Mrs. Garcia left breakfast for me. I wanted to thank you again before you got too busy." "You don't need to keep thanking me," Colt said with a small smile, "but you're welcome." Rosalie looked out at the ranch, taking in the wide expanse of land, the mountains in the distance, the clear blue sky overhead. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Peaceful. It is, Colt agreed. Took me a long time to build this place up, but it's home now. Do you run it alone? Mostly. I've got a couple of hands who come by during branding season or when I need extra help with the cattle, but day to day, it's just me and Mrs. Garcia. She keeps the house running, and I handle everything else. Rosalie was quiet for a moment, then said hesitantly, I don't want to be a burden. If there's work I can do to earn my keep, I'm happy to help. Colt shook his head. You're not a burden and you don't need to earn anything. You're a guest here, Rosalie. Focus on getting your strength back. I'm not used to being idle, Rosalie admitted. On Gerald's ranch, I was expected to cook, clean, mend, tend the garden. There was always something to do. Well, if you want to help Mrs. Garcia in the kitchen or the garden, I'm sure she'd appreciate the company, Colt said. But don't feel obligated. You've been through a lot. Rosalie nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. It's strange, she said quietly. Being somewhere where I don't have to be afraid all the time, I keep waiting for something bad to happen. Colt felt his chest tighten at the raw honesty in her words. Nothing bad is going to happen here, he said firmly. I promise you that. Rosalie looked up at him, and for a moment their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that instant, something unspoken but profound, and Colt felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He cleared his throat and stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. I should get back to work. Let me know if you need anything. Rosalie nodded, and Colt turned away before he could do something foolish, like reach out and brush a stray strand of hair from her face or tell her that he thought she was the bravest woman he had ever met. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, trying to ignore the way his thoughts kept drifting back to Rosalie. It had been a long time since Colt had felt drawn to anyone, and the intensity of his reaction to her unnerved him. She was vulnerable, hurting, and entirely off-limits, and he needed to remember that. But as the days passed and Rosalie slowly began to come out of her shell, Colt found it increasingly difficult to keep his distance. She was kind and thoughtful, often helping Mrs. Garcia with the cooking or spending time in the garden tending to the vegetables. She had a quiet sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe, and her smile, when it appeared, was like sunshine breaking through clouds. A week after Rosalie's arrival, Colt was working in the stable when she appeared in the doorway, a basket in her hands. Mrs. Garcia sent me out with lunch, she said. She said you always forget to eat when you're working, Colt grinned. She's not wrong. He wiped his hands on his trousers and gestured to a bale of hay. Care to join me? Rosalie hesitated, then nodded and sat down. She unpacked the basket, revealing sandwiches, apples, and a jug of cold lemonade. They ate in companionable silence, and Colt found himself acutely aware of Rosalie's presence beside him, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her dress, the delicate curve of her neck. Can I ask you something? Rosalie said suddenly. Colt looked at her. Of course. Why aren't you married? She asked, then immediately flushed. I'm sorry, that's too personal. Forget I asked. Colt chuckled. It's all right. Honest answer, I never found the right person. I was in the war when I was younger, and when I came back, I was more focused on building this ranch than finding a wife. By the time I looked up, most of the women my age were already spoken for, and the ones who weren't didn't much care for a quiet rancher with dirt under his nails. Rosalie smiled faintly. Their loss. Colt felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. What about you? He asked carefully. Before Gerald, I mean, what was your life like? Rosalie's expression grew distant. I grew up in Missouri. My parents had a small farm and I had 3 younger brothers. When I was 21, my parents died in a fever outbreak and my brothers went to live with our uncle. I was too old to be taken in, so I had to fend for myself. Gerald was passing through town looking for a wife, and I thought marrying him was my best option. You were desperate, Colt said gently. I was foolish, Rosalie corrected bitterly. I ignored all the warning signs because I was so afraid of being alone. He was charming at first, but once we were married, everything changed. He drank heavily, gambled away money we didn't have, and when things went wrong, he took it out on me. That's not your fault, Colt said firmly. None of it. He's the one who made those choices. Rosalie looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you for saying that. I've spent so long believing I deserved it somehow that I drove him to it. You didn't, Colt said, his voice low and fierce. No one deserves to be treated the way he treated you. You're strong and brave, Rosalie, and don't let anyone tell you different. A tear slipped down Rosalie's cheek, and this time she didn't wipe it away. I don't feel strong. I feel broken. Colt reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. Broken things can be mended, he said softly, given time and care. Rosalie's breath hitched, and for a moment they sat frozen, the air between them charged with something electric and fragile. Then Rosalie pulled back slightly, and Colt let his hand fall, respecting her boundaries. I should get back to the house, Rosalie said, her voice unsteady. Mrs. Garcia will wonder where I am. Of course, Colt said, though he felt a pang of disappointment. Thank you for lunch. Rosalie stood and gathered the basket, then paused. Colt? Yeah, thank you for everything, I mean it. Colt watched her walk away, his heart pounding in his chest. He was in trouble, he realized. Deep, dangerous trouble. Because somewhere between finding Rosalie in his barn and this moment, he had started to fall for her. The realization should have terrified him. Rosalie was still legally married, still healing from trauma, still figuring out who she was outside of Gerald's shadow. The last thing she needed was another man complicating her life. But as Colt returned to his work, he couldn't shake the feeling that Rosalie Tucker was going to change his life forever. 2 weeks turned into 3, and Rosalie continued to blossom under the safety and care of Colt's ranch. The bruises on her face faded, her body began to fill out with regular meals, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually gave way to something lighter. She laughed more often, spoke more freely, and even began riding one of Colt's gentler horses in the evenings. Colt found himself looking forward to those evening rides when he and Rosalie would explore the ranch together, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about the books she loved to read, about her dream of one day having a garden filled with flowers. He told her about the war, about the friends he had lost, about the satisfaction of building something with his own 2 hands. They were growing closer, and Colt could feel it with every passing day. The way Rosalie's eyes sought him out across a room. The way her laughter came more easily when he was near. The way she leaned just slightly toward him when they stood together, but Colt kept his distance, careful not to push, careful not to assume. Rosalie needed time and space, and he was determined to give her both, no matter how much he longed to tell her how he felt. One evening in early November, Colt was repairing a broken wagon wheel when Rosalie came running out of the house, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Colt. She gasped. There's a rider coming up the road. I think it's Gerald. Colt's blood turned to ice. He dropped his tools and stood, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. Get in the house and stay with Mrs. Garcia. Lock the doors and don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Rosalie nodded, her fear palpable, and ran back inside. Colt heard the door bolt slide into place, and then he turned his attention to the approaching rider. The man on horseback was tall and broad, with a thick beard and a mien set to his jaw. He rode with the arrogance of someone who believed the world owed him something, and when he pulled his horse to a stop in front of Colt, his eyes were cold and calculating. You Colt Brennan? The man demanded. I am, Colt said evenly. And you are, Gerald Tucker. I'm looking for my wife. Been told she might be here. Colt's expression didn't change. Don't know anyone by that name. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Don't play games with me, Brennan. I know she's here. Someone in Tucson saw a woman matching her description riding through with supplies last week. Now bring her out, or I'll tear this place apart looking for her. Colt's hand hovered near his gun. Even if I did know where your wife was, what makes you think I'd hand her over to a man who beats women? Gerald's face flushed with anger. What happens between a man and his wife is none of your business. Rosalie belongs to me and I have every legal right to take her back. She's not property, Colt said coldly, and she's not going anywhere with you. Gerald dismounted in one swift motion, his hand moving to his own gun. You got no right to keep her from me. She's my wife, and if you don't hand her over, I'll make sure the law comes down on you hard. Colt didn't flinch. Go ahead and fetch the law. I'll tell them exactly what kind of man you are, and we'll see how that works out for you. For a moment, Colt thought Gerald might draw his gun. The tension stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, and Colt prepared himself for violence. But then Gerald seemed to think better of it. He spat on the ground and sneered. This isn't over, Brennan. I'll be back, and when I come, I'll have the sheriff with me. Then we'll see who's in the right. Looking forward to it, Colt said flatly. Gerald remounted his horse and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Colt stood watching until the man was out of sight, then turned and strode to the house. He knocked on the door. Rosalie, it's me, he's gone. The door opened immediately, and Rosalie threw herself into his arms, her whole body shaking. Colt caught her instinctively, wrapping his arms around her and holding her close. He found me, she whispered against his chest. He found me. It's all right, Colt murmured, stroking her hair. He's gone, and I didn't tell him anything. You're safe. He said he's coming back, Rosalie said, pulling back to look at him. With the sheriff, Colt, legally I'm still his wife. The law will side with him. Colt's jaw tightened. Then we'll fight it. We'll go to town and talk to a lawyer. There has to be a way to dissolve the marriage, especially if we can prove he hurt you. Rosalie shook her head helplessly. It's his word against mine, and I'm just a woman. No one will believe me. I believe you, Colt said fiercely, and I'll make damn sure everyone else does too, Mrs. Garcia appeared behind Rosalie, her expression troubled. Senor Brennan is right, Mija. We will fight this together, but you must be prepared. Men like Gerald Tucker do not give up easily. I know, Rosalie whispered. That's what scares me. Colt cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. I meant what I said that first night. You're safe here, and I'm not going to let him take you. Whatever it takes, I'll protect you. Do you trust me? Rosalie's eyes searched his, and then slowly she nodded. Yes. I trust you. The words hit Colt like a punch to the chest. He had never wanted to be worthy of anything more in his life. Then we'll get through this, he promised. Together. The next morning, Colt and Rosalie rode into Tucson to meet with a lawyer. Mrs. Garcia had recommended a man named Samuel Whitfield, who had a reputation for being fair and progressive, especially when it came to women's rights. Whitfield's office was above the general store, a cramped space filled with books and papers. The lawyer himself was a thin man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a kind demeanor. He listened carefully as Rosalie recounted her story, his expression growing graver with each word. When she finished, Whitfield leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Mrs. Tucker, I won't lie to you. Arizona law heavily favors the husband in cases like this. Divorce is difficult to obtain, and even when it is granted, it's usually on grounds of adultery or abandonment, neither of which apply here. What about abuse? Colt demanded. She has scars, witnesses who can attest to her condition when she arrived at my ranch, Whitfield sighed. Unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, a husband has the right to discipline his wife as he sees fit. It's an archaic view, but it's the reality we're dealing with. That's barbaric, Colt said flatly. I agree, Whitfield said. But it's the law. However, there may be another option. If Mrs. Tucker can prove that her life was in danger, she may be able to file for legal separation, which would at least prevent her husband from forcing her to return to him. How do we prove that? Rosalie asked. Whitfield considered. Medical testimony would help. If a doctor can document your injuries and attest that they were severe enough to constitute a threat to your life, that would strengthen your case. Additionally, any witnesses who saw the abuse or can speak to your husband's violent behavior would be beneficial. Rosalie bit her lip. There were ranch hands who saw things, but I don't know if they would testify against Gerald. He pays their wages. We'll find someone, Colt said firmly. What else do we need? Patience, Whitfield said. These cases take time, and in the meantime, Mrs. Tucker should stay somewhere safe. If her husband attempts to forcibly remove her, that will only help our case as it demonstrates his violent tendencies. She's staying with me, Colt said. And he's not getting near her. Whitfield raised an eyebrow. Mr. Brennan, you should be aware that harboring another man's wife could land you in legal trouble. Let it, Colt said. I'm not turning her out. The lawyer studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I'll draw up the paperwork for a legal separation and file it with the court. In the meantime, keep a low profile and document everything. If Gerald Tucker shows up again, make note of the date, time, and what was said. The more evidence we have, the better. They left the lawyer's office with a plan, but Rosalie was quiet on the ride back to the ranch. Colt glanced at her several times, noting the tension in her shoulders and the way she worried her lower lip. Talk to me, he said gently. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that this is hopeless, Rosalie said. Even if we get the separation, Gerald won't respect it. He'll come after me anyway. Then I'll be ready for him, Colt said. Rosalie turned to look at him, her eyes filled with anguish. I don't want you to get hurt because of me. You've already done so much, risked so much. Maybe I should just leave, go somewhere he can't find me. And where would you go? Colt asked. How would you survive? Rosalie, running isn't the answer. We have to stand and fight. But why? Rosalie burst out. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much? Colt pulled his horse to a stop, and Rosalie did the same. They sat there in the middle of the desert, the wind blowing dust around them, and Colt knew he couldn't keep his feelings hidden any longer. Because I care about you, he said simply. More than I should, maybe, but I do. I can't stand the thought of you being hurt or afraid, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. That's why. Rosalie stared at him, her eyes wide. Colt, you don't have to say anything, Colt said quickly. I know the timing is terrible and you have enough to deal with without me adding to it, but you asked, and I'm not going to lie to you. I care about you, Rosalie, a lot. For a long moment, Rosalie didn't speak. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. I care about you too, she said softly. I didn't want to. I was so scared of feeling anything for anyone after Gerald, but you've been so kind, so patient, and somewhere along the way I started to fall for you. Colt's heart soared. Yeah, Rosalie nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, but Colt, I'm still married. And even if we get the separation, people are going to talk. Your reputation? I don't care about my reputation, Colt interrupted. I care about you, and if people want to gossip, let them. We'll know the truth, and that's all that matters. Rosalie squeezed his hand. You're a good man, Colt Brennan, better than I deserve. You deserve the world, Colt said, and I'm going to do my best to give it to you. They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, and when they arrived, Mrs. Garcia took one look at them and smiled knowingly. About time, she muttered in Spanish, and Colt couldn't help but laugh. The following weeks were a strange blend of tension and happiness. Gerald did not return, but Colt remained vigilant, keeping his rifle close and his eyes on the horizon. The paperwork for Rosalie's legal separation was filed, and they waited to hear back from the court. In the meantime, Colt and Rosalie grew closer. They spent their evenings sitting on the porch, talking and watching the sunset. Colt taught Rosalie how to shoot, insisting that she should be able to defend herself if necessary. Rosalie helped Colt with the horses, discovering a natural affinity for the animals. One evening in late November, as they sat together under a blanket watching the stars, Rosalie rested her head on Colt's shoulder and sighed contentedly. I never thought I could feel this way again, she said softly. Happy, safe, hopeful. Colt wrapped his arm around her and pulled her closer. You deserve to feel all those things and more. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, Rosalie admitted. For Gerald to show up, or for the court to deny the separation, or for you to realize I'm more trouble than I'm worth. That's never going to happen, Colt said firmly. "You're not trouble, Rosalie. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Rosalie lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "You really mean that?" "Every word," Colt said. Rosalie leaned in slowly, giving him time to pull away, and pressed her lips to his in a soft, tentative kiss. Colt's breath caught, and then he was kissing her back, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. The kiss was gentle and sweet, filled with all the things they hadn't yet said out loud. When they finally pulled apart, Rosalie was smiling. "I've wanted to do that for weeks." "Me too," Colt admitted, "but I didn't want to rush you." "You're not rushing me," Rosalie said. "I'm exactly where I want to be." They sat together for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, Colt felt truly content. But their peace was shattered a week later when Gerald returned, this time with the sheriff and 2 deputies in tow. Colt was in the stable when he heard the horses approaching, and he immediately went to find Rosalie. She was in the garden with Mrs. Garcia, and when she saw his expression, her face went pale. "He's back, isn't he?" "Yes," Colt said. "With the law, stay here, I'll handle this." "No," Rosalie said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm done hiding. If they're here for me, then I need to face them." Colt wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. "All right, but stay close to me." They walked to the front of the house together, where Gerald sat on his horse flanked by the sheriff and his deputies. The sheriff was a heavy-set man with a graying mustache and a weary expression. He dismounted and approached Colt. "Colt Brennan?" he asked. "That's right," Colt said. "I'm Sheriff Davies. Mr. Tucker here says you're harboring his wife against her will. That true?" "I'm not harboring anyone against their will," Colt said evenly. "Mrs. Tucker is here of her own free choice." Gerald sneered from his horse. "She's my wife, and she belongs at home with me. I have every legal right to take her back." Sheriff Davies looked at Rosalie. "Ma'am, is it true you left your husband?" Rosalie stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Yes, Sheriff, I left because my husband was abusing me. I feared for my life." Gerald's face turned red. "That's a lie. She's always been dramatic, making up stories for attention. Sheriff, you can't seriously believe her." "I have scars," Rosalie said, her voice rising. "Bruises. Mrs. Garcia and Mr. Brennan both saw the state I was in when I arrived. I was half dead from starvation and beatings." Sheriff Davies looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Tucker, I understand this is difficult, but the law is clear. A wife's place is with her husband unless there's legal cause for separation." "We've filed for legal separation," Colt interjected. "Samuel Whitfield in Tucson has the paperwork." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "You filed for separation?" "Yes," Rosalie said. "On grounds that my life was in danger." Gerald laughed harshly. "This is ridiculous. Sheriff, are you going to let this man keep my wife from me or not?" Sheriff Davies sighed and rubbed his face. "Mrs. Tucker, until the court rules on your separation, you are still legally bound to your husband. I can't force you to go with him, but I also can't stop him from taking you if he chooses." "Like hell," Colt said, his hand moving to his gun. "Mr. Brennan, don't make this harder than it needs to be," the sheriff warned. "I don't want anyone getting hurt." "Then tell him to leave," Colt said flatly, "because I'm not letting him take her." Gerald dismounted and took a step forward, his hand on his own gun. "You got no right to interfere, Brennan. She's mine." "She's not anyone's," Colt shot back. "And if you take one more step, we're going to have a problem." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The deputies shifted nervously, and Sheriff Davies held up his hands. "Everyone calm down. Let's not do anything we'll regret." "I'll regret it if I let this man take her back to a life of abuse," Colt said, his eyes locked on Gerald. "Sheriff, look at her face. Look at the bruises that are still fading. Ask Mrs. Garcia what condition Rosalie was in when she arrived. And then tell me I'm wrong to protect her." Sheriff Davies looked at Rosalie more closely, and Colt saw the moment he noticed the fading bruises on her cheek and jaw. The sheriff's expression shifted, becoming troubled. "Mr. Tucker, did you strike your wife?" he asked. Gerald's jaw tightened. "A man has the right to discipline his household as he sees fit." "That's not an answer," Sheriff Davies said. "It's the only answer you're getting," Gerald snapped. "Now are you going to do your job or not?" The sheriff was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he sighed. "Mr. Tucker, I'm not going to force Mrs. Tucker to return with you today. Given that a legal separation has been filed, I think it's best to let the courts decide. If they rule in your favor, you can come back with a writ and I'll enforce it. But until then, she stays here." Gerald's face turned purple with rage. "This is an outrage. You're letting her make a fool of me." "I'm following the law," Sheriff Davies said firmly. "Now I suggest you get back on your horse and go home before this situation escalates." For a moment, Colt thought Gerald might refuse. But then the man spat on the ground, shot Rosalie a look of pure hatred, and remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." He rode off, and the sheriff and his deputies followed shortly after. When they were gone, Rosalie's knees buckled and Colt caught her, holding her tight. "It's all right," he murmured. "You were so brave." "He's never going to stop," Rosalie whispered. "He'll keep coming back until he gets what he wants." "Then we'll keep fighting," Colt said. "For as long as it takes." Mrs. Garcia appeared and gently took Rosalie's arm. "Come, Mija, let me make you some tea. You need to rest." Colt watched them go, his mind racing. He knew Rosalie was right. Gerald wasn't going to give up. Men like him never did. Which meant Colt needed to find a way to end this, once and for all. The answer came a few days later when Samuel Whitfield sent word that the court had granted Rosalie's legal separation on the grounds that her life had been in danger. It was a small victory, but an important one. Rosalie was no longer legally obligated to return to Gerald, and if he tried to force her, he would be breaking the law. But Whitfield also warned them that Gerald could appeal the decision and that the process could take months. In the meantime, Rosalie would be in a state of legal limbo, not quite married but not quite free. It was frustrating, but Rosalie seemed lighter after receiving the news. She smiled more often, laughed more easily, and the haunted look in her eyes continued to fade. One evening in mid-December, as they sat by the fire in the parlor, Rosalie turned to Colt and said, "I want to start thinking about the future." Colt looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've spent so long just trying to survive that I haven't thought about what I actually want from life," Rosalie said. "But now, with the separation granted and Gerald legally unable to take me back, I feel like I can finally breathe, and I want to start planning for what comes next." "What do you want?" Colt asked gently. Rosalie hesitated, then said, "I want to be with you. I want to build a life here on this ranch. I want to wake up every morning without fear and go to bed every night feeling safe. I want to have a family, a real family, built on love and respect." Colt's heart swelled. "I want all of those things too, with you," Rosalie smiled, her eyes shining. "Then let's make it happen. Once the divorce is finalized, and it will be finalized eventually, I want to marry you, Colt Brennan, if you'll have me." Colt reached out and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I would be honored to marry you, Rosalie Tucker, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." They sealed the promise with a kiss, and for the first time, Colt allowed himself to believe that they might actually have a future together. The next several months were a test of patience. Gerald did indeed appeal the separation, dragging the case out as long as possible. But Whitfield was relentless, and with each court appearance, their case grew stronger. They found a former ranch hand of Gerald's who was willing to testify to the abuse he had witnessed, and a doctor in Tucson provided a detailed report on Rosalie's injuries. Slowly but surely, the tide turned in their favor. In April of 1879, the court granted Rosalie a full divorce on the grounds of cruelty and endangerment. She was finally legally free. Colt proposed to her that very evening, going down on one knee in the garden she had worked so hard to cultivate. Rosalie said yes through happy tears, and they were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Mrs. Garcia and a few close friends in attendance. Their wedding night was tender and unhurried, with Colt taking great care to make sure Rosalie felt safe and cherished. She had been nervous at first, the memories of Gerald's brutality still lingering. But Colt was patient and gentle, and by the end of the night, Rosalie was smiling and content in his arms. "I love you," she whispered as they lay together under the stars, the windows open to let in the cool night air. "I love you too," Colt murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. More than words can say. Life on the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. Rosalie thrived in her new role as Colt's wife, managing the household and helping with the horses. She proved to have a talent for breeding and training, and under her guidance, the ranch's reputation for quality horses grew. In the spring of 1880, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant. Colt was overjoyed and he hovered over her like a worried hen, much to her amusement. "I'm not made of glass," she teased one evening as he helped her into a chair. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. Not my wife," Colt said firmly, "and not carrying my child, so humor me." Rosalie laughed and kissed him. "All right, I'll humor you." Their son was born in November of 1880, a healthy, squalling baby with Colt's dark hair and Rosalie's green eyes. They named him Samuel after the lawyer who had helped them, and Colt held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He is," Rosalie agreed, exhausted but radiant. "Just like his father." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter named Emma arrived in 1882, followed by another son, James, in 1884. The ranch prospered, and Colt and Rosalie built a life filled with love, laughter, and hard work. Gerald Tucker faded into memory, a dark chapter in Rosalie's past that no longer had power over her. She heard through the grapevine that he had remarried and moved to California, and she felt nothing but relief. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colt and Rosalie stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and life. "Do you ever think about that night?" Rosalie asked quietly. "When you found me in the barn?" Colt wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "All the time. It was the night my life changed forever." Rosalie smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "Mine too. I was so scared, and then there you were, telling me I was safe, and you know what? You were right. I have been safe every single day since." "And you always will be," Colt promised. "For as long as I'm breathing." Rosalie turned to look at him, her eyes filled with love. "I know, and I'm so grateful. For you, for this life, for our family. You saved me, Colt." "No," Colt said, cupping her face gently. "We saved each other." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together, both Colt and Rosalie knew that they had found something rare and precious. A love that had been forged in hardship and tempered by time, a love that would last forever. As the years continued to unfold, the Brennan family became a fixture in the community around Tucson. Colt's reputation as a fair and honest rancher grew, and people came from miles around to buy his horses. Rosalie became known for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone in need, often taking in women who were fleeing difficult situations and giving them a safe place to stay until they could get back on their feet. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who shared his father's love of the land. Emma inherited her mother's gentle spirit and her talent with horses, while James proved to have a head for numbers and eventually took over managing the ranch's finances. In 1895, when Colt and Rosalie celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary, they gathered their children around them and told them the story of how they had met, how Rosalie had been found sleeping in the barn, terrified and broken, and how Colt had offered her safety and a new beginning. Samuel, now 15, listened with wide eyes. "Were you scared, Pa, when you found Ma?" "I was scared for her," Colt admitted. "Scared of what she had been through and scared that I wouldn't be able to help her, but your mother is the bravest person I know. She survived things that would have broken most people, and she came out the other side stronger." Emma, 13, looked at her mother with admiration. "You're amazing, Mama." Rosalie smiled and reached out to stroke her daughter's hair. I'm just a woman who was lucky enough to find the right man at the right time. Your father gave me a chance when I had nothing, and I'll be grateful for that every day of my life. James, 11, frowned thoughtfully. What happened to your first husband, the bad one? Rosalie exchanged a glance with Colt. They had always been honest with their children, believing that truth was better than secrets. He moved away, Rosalie said simply. And as far as I know, he never bothered anyone again, but even if he had come back, your father would have protected me. He always has. And always will, Colt added, squeezing Rosalie's hand. The children seemed satisfied with this answer, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But later that night, as Colt and Rosalie lay in bed together, Rosalie said softly, "Do you think we did the right thing?" Telling them the whole story? I do, Colt said. They need to know that life isn't always easy and that sometimes people have to fight for their happiness. They also need to know that no matter what happens, family stands together. Rosalie nodded. You're right, as always. Colt chuckled and pulled her close. Not always, but when it comes to you and our children, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're all safe and happy. I know, Rosalie whispered, and I love you for it. In 1900, Samuel married a local girl named Catherine, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch. Emma followed suit in 1902, marrying a kind young man named Thomas who worked as a blacksmith in Tucson. James, ever the scholar, left for college in the East, but promised to return once he had finished his education. Colt and Rosalie became grandparents in 1901 when Samuel and Catherine welcomed a baby boy, and the joy of holding their grandchild brought tears to both their eyes. Rosalie marveled at how far she had come, from a terrified woman sleeping in a barn to a wife, mother, and now grandmother, surrounded by love and family. One evening in the summer of 1905, as Colt and Rosalie sat on their porch watching the sunset, Colt said, "You know, I've been thinking." "About what?" Rosalie asked, her hand resting comfortably in his. "About how lucky I am," Colt said. "To have found you, to have built this life with you. I never imagined I'd be this happy." Rosalie smiled. "Neither did I. There were times, especially in those early days with Gerald, when I thought I'd never be happy again. But then you found me and everything changed." "Best night of my life," Colt said. "Finding you in that barn." "Mine too," Rosalie agreed, "even though I was terrified." Colt turned to look at her, his eyes warm with love. "I meant what I said that night, you know, that you were safe, and I've spent every day since trying to make sure you feel that way." "You have," Rosalie said softly. "Every single day, you gave me a life I never dreamed possible, Colt. You gave me love, safety, children, a home. You gave me everything. And you gave me purpose," Colt said. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, but loving you, building a family with you, that's what made my life meaningful." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The ranch spread out before them, alive with the sounds of evening, horses whinnying in the distance, the laughter of grandchildren playing in the yard, the rustle of wind through the cottonwood trees. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gone to the barn that night?" Rosalie asked. "All the time," Colt admitted. "And every time I do, I thank God that I did, because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Rosalie leaned over and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke of years of love and devotion. "I can't imagine mine without you either." As the years continued to pass, Colt and Rosalie grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their children build their own families, saw their grandchildren grow into strong, capable individuals, and eventually welcomed great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch remained a beacon of stability and love, a place where family gathered for holidays and celebrations, where stories were told and memories were made. And through it all, Colt and Rosalie remained at the center, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. In the spring of 1918, as Colt approached his 70th birthday, He and Rosalie took a ride out to the spot where they used to watch the sunsets in their early days together. The land had changed over the years, fences had been built, buildings had been added, trees had grown, but the essence of the place remained the same. They dismounted and stood together, looking out over the ranch they had built. Colt's hair was gray now and his movements were slower, but his love for Rosalie burned as brightly as ever. 40 years, Rosalie said softly. Can you believe it? Feels like yesterday and forever all at once, Colt said, wrapping his arm around her waist. But I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Not even the hard parts? Rosalie asked. Especially not the hard parts, Colt said. They made us who we are, they taught us how to fight for what matters. Rosalie rested her head on his shoulder and they stood there in silence, two people who had weathered every storm life had thrown at them and emerged stronger for it. I love you, Colt Brennan, Rosalie said. More today than I did yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. I love you too, Rosalie Brennan, Colt replied. With everything I am and everything I have. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Colt and Rosalie mounted their horses and rode back to the ranch house. Their children and grandchildren were waiting for them, gathered for a celebration of Colt's 70th birthday. The house was filled with laughter and love, with the sounds of family coming together to honor the man who had built this legacy. But for Colt, the greatest gift was sitting beside him, Rosalie, his wife, his partner, his love. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Colt and Rosalie lay in bed together, their hands intertwined. Thank you, Rosalie whispered. For what? Colt asked. For that night in the barn, Rosalie said. For telling me I was safe, for giving me a reason to believe in love again, for being the man you are. Colt squeezed her hand. Thank you for trusting me, for choosing to stay, for building this life with me. They fell asleep that way, holding hands, their hearts beating in sync. And in the morning they woke to another day, another opportunity to love each other, another chapter in the beautiful story they had written together. Colt Brennan lived to the age of 78, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1926 with Rosalie by his side. Rosalie followed him 5 years later in 1931, at the age of 76. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree they had planted together in the early years of their marriage. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continued to run the ranch, keeping alive the legacy of love, courage, and resilience that Colt and Rosalie had established. And every year, on the anniversary of the night Colt found Rosalie in the barn, the family gathered at the graveside to tell the story of how it all began, with a terrified woman, a compassionate cowboy, and 5 simple words that changed everything. Stay, you're safe here now. The Brennan Ranch stood for generations as a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. It was a place where hope was never lost, where second chances were given freely, and where family meant everything. And at the heart of it all was the love story of Colt and Rosalie Brennan, a love that had defied the odds, overcome every obstacle, and ultimately created something beautiful and enduring. Their story became legend in the area around Tucson, passed down through generations as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. That kindness can change lives. That love, real love, is worth fighting for. And so the legacy of Colt and Rosalie lived on, not just in the land they had cultivated or the horses they had bred, but in the hearts of everyone who heard their story and believed in the power of love to heal, to transform, and to endure. The barn where Colt first found Rosalie still stood on the ranch, weathered by time but sturdy. The family kept it as a reminder of where it all began, and sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blew just right, it was almost possible to imagine a young woman curled up in the hay, terrified and alone, and a cowboy with a lantern, offering her the one thing she needed most: safety, compassion, and the promise of a better tomorrow. It was a story that would never be forgotten, a love that would never fade, and a legacy that would continue for as long as there were Brennans on that land, keeping alive the memory of the night that started it all.